So I'm Petar Jandrić, or Petar Jandrić in my language. I'm from the Zagreb University of Applied Sciences. I'm actually also program director and professor at the School of Informatics and Computing. And I do digital ed. So what I do actually is I teach social science to engineers. So I'm kind of a white crow or whatever in this school, like in the place with many hundreds of engineers. There's just a few of us actually doing social science, and I'm one of these people. But I do have some engineering background, and I've also been trying for many years now to connect my interest in information sciences with my interest in critical pedagogy and in this tradition of critical inquiry in pedagogy, which is what drew me to network learning. A few years ago, as Vivian said, we actually met at one network learning conference and then at the other, and then I did this book with network learning, and now I'm hosting the next network learning conference. Of course, network learning is the only thing I'm doing, but it is very important in my work, and it has actually become more and more important as of recently. So actually, before we start, it's quite common to introduce yourself, you know, like if you come from, I don't know, America, then you obviously don't need to introduce it, but if you come from a small country such as Croatia, then it's usual and customary as well to introduce yourself. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm just going to play you a short video made basically by the Croatian Ministry of Tourism, which is just a short tourism promo video. But also, I will use this as an anchor for a bit of a lengthy discussion, so it's not going to be completely just showing off. It's going to be also something else. Well, I hope you liked it. I hope you liked it. I'm showing this video for several reasons. One of the reasons is because I like the fact that in Croatia, actually, we also have bagpipes. So when I showed it in Scotland, everybody was like, did you steal something Scottish? I said, well, no, we actually do have the bagpipes because it's like something else. But what I wanted to show with this video, actually, is I wanted to put you into mindset of the long view to what we are doing. So these days, we usually speak about e-learning, technology-supported learning, technology-enhanced learning, whatever. We speak about many of these things. And actually, when we speak about them, we always think about something that we are doing here and now. But then, from the video that I showed you, actually, there are two things that I wanted to kind of emphasize. The first thing is nature, because the video shows a lot of nature. And the second thing is history, because the video also shows a lot of history. So this image, you cannot see it so well, but maybe some of you know the story of Pythagoras, and while he was doing his research with his stick in the mud, and then a Roman soldier came over, and the Roman soldier asked him to come to the general, because the general invited him. And Pythagoras said in Latin, "Noli turbare circulos meos," or "do not touch my circles," because he was so focused to his circles and what he was doing, his geometry on the floor, that actually he didn't feel like moving from there. What Pythagoras was doing at the time, he was actually doing some teaching, right? So my question is, what is the difference between teaching in Pythagoras times and from teaching in this image and from teaching what we do today? So what is the name? How does what we do today differ from what our ancestors did? And of course, a big part of the answer lies within the role of technology. So we usually speak about, okay, so what we have today and what we didn't have before is technology, usually computers. So responses to this technological question usually come from one or other position of determinism. So social determinism would say that the society is what shapes our use of technologies in learning. Uses technology, determinism would be like more individualistic and say that the way that we personally use technologies will actually shape our learning. And technological determinism will of course say that technologies shaped our learning. And now, looking at these theoretical approaches up there, many of these approaches are actually non-conscious, so they don't really question the role of technologies. And many approaches are actually techno-determinist in one or another form, saying, okay, so here's this new technology, so this new technology will shape what we do, and we have to adapt to this shape, which I believe is quite wrong. And some approaches, not so many approaches, are quite nuanced, and only a few of these approaches are actually non-determinist. And this was probably, for me, one of the main points of attraction towards network learning, because network learning is one such approach, which actually mixes all those approaches, but doesn't actually subscribe to any form of determinism, whether it's technological determinism, social determinism, or uses determinism. So one of the ways to approach this question of the relationship between learning and technologies is from the position of cultural studies. So here's, of course, Stuart Hall, and there's Henry Giraud and Peter McLaren. You can see it very well. So Stuart Hall, of course, started the tradition of cultural studies, and Henry and Peter actually pushed this tradition towards critical pedagogy. But the main thing about the digital culture's perspective is actually that it looks beyond determinisms, and it actually looks in the ways that culture, which is usually diverse, nuanced, strange, and so on, as opposed to the rational universalism of education. So being the idea that, I mean, this is Jeremy Knox from 2015, where he said, okay, why do we need actually the perspective of digital culture? We need it because it provides us with a unique type of angle of looking at this relationship between technologies and education. And there are three main perspectives within the digital cultures. It's cyber cultures, community cultures, and algorithmic cultures. I say that A/historical, because they are historical in a way. So cyber cultures was the first, community cultures was the second, and algorithmic cultures is what we are facing with today. But then they're also completely intertwined, because all these perspectives actually interact with each other, and you cannot clearly divide them. So today, in the phase of algorithmic cultures, we actually have a lot from cyber cultures and from community cultures as well. I will just provide a brief overview of these perspectives before I actually move to the project I would like to present. So the phase of cyber cultures, it was inspired by works of science fiction. Of course, these are the most famous ones, like Neuromancer and Mirror Shades. I don't know whether there are any lovers of science fiction here, but that's definitely, those are the biggest, I mean, the most important books in the field. And then also cultural media studies, like obviously Donna Haraway's Cyber Manifesto, and then Catherine Hale's a bit later, Mackenzie Walker, Hacker Manifesto, and so on. So the main themes here, when you read pieces such as Neuromancer, it's always this uncanny relationship between humans and technologies. So we are kind of becoming cyborgs in a way that we are intertwined with technologies in some strange ways, in some unpredictable ways, high technology, low technology, feminism and technology, as Donna Haraway would mention. So basically, the phase of cyber cultures is the phase where people started to question, okay, so what is it that these technologies do to us? And they were mostly techno-determinists, not maybe very techno-determinist, but still techno-determinist in a way that if you take a technology and kind of mix it with human beings, you will get something, and this is something that really cannot be reversed, being the idea, like, for instance, William Gibson actually writes a lot about this feeling of loss, because when in Neuromancer and his other works, when he speaks about this cyber future, what he actually also shows a lot of nostalgia about the times that passed, meaning that we cannot actually escape this kind of destiny. But in the phase of community cultures, which roughly started with Howard Rheingold's The Virtual Community in 2000, although it's just a seminal book, there were books before that, and Juha Soranta and Theraved and Wikiworld and so on. The idea is that with the advent of Web 2, we had this idea that technology is not really important, that is the people who are important. And then we have these notions of social learning and wisdom of the crowd, basically in tools from Wikipedia, MySpace to MOOCs this day, although we are already very much, I mean, the MOOC hype is very much behind us already. It's gone down now. But still, this is the phase we call community cultures, where the focus was not so much on technologies, but on human relationships through these technologies. And this actually produced a lot of good research in many areas, as I said, including network learning. If you go to the website of Network Learning Conference, and if you click on past conferences, you will see that 6, 7, 8 years ago, it was a very prominent topic then, and it still is. I mean, I'm in the program committee of next year's conference, and still some people are speaking about MOOCs, but not as much as 4 years ago or 6 years ago. It was the height, or it was the peak then. Now it's already gone down. What we are speaking about today, and now I will slow down because this was all the introduction, so I started to try to be very quick. But what we are speaking today is the phase of algorithmic cultures. And the phase of algorithmic cultures is the phase which is in our development now, which is concerned with autonomous agents in various areas of human life, from self-driving cars to various expert systems or clever systems for teaching and learning, which of course cause many issues, social issues and everything. So there's a lot of talk about technological unemployment. Actually, at the moment I'm editing a book also with Springer on the relationships between education and technological unemployment. And it's interesting because our call for papers has actually provoked so much interest. So you can obviously see that it's a hot topic at the moment. But anyway, speaking of algorithmic cultures, it signals a shift from the centrality of individuals or social concerns and towards the relationship between human and non-human agents. meaning that it's not that we should now just speak about people as we used to speak in the Web 2 phase, the phase of community cultures, or in the phase of cyber cultures, but actually we speak about these dialectical relationships between these human and non-human agents. And obviously this merges various concepts from before. So obviously we still speak about cyborgs and we still speak about various online communities, but we also speak about post-humanism, about the idea that human and non-human actors are kind of equal, whether radically equal or not, it depends on the approach. It's more and more, the notion of the post-digital is more and more prominent. So for instance, I remember I've been affiliated for a long time with masters in e-learning at the University of Edinburgh, and that's an interesting story. In the phase of cyber cultures, it was called Masters of E-learning. Then, a few years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, they changed it into the Masters of Digital Learning, and now actually they're trying to change the name into Masters of Post-Digital Learning, it's basically the same masters. Of course, they change program regularly, but this is kind of where we got this idea to divide this development into those 3 phases. So these concepts, I mean, the phase of algorithmic cultures obviously has all these concerns from the previous phases. And of course, some critics called it a bit dodgy. I was actually faced with people asking me, why post? It's just everything is post, like post modern, post this, post this. So why would you like to speak about the post digital? Like, it seems to be for some people quite a dodgy concept. But then some traditions again fit as glove to this notion of algorithmic cultures, and this is one of them is network learning. Another one of them is the good work that the group from Edinburgh has been doing, because in this phase of algorithmic cultures, and this is arguably the new challenge that we are facing at the moment right now. So the cyber things have passed, the MOOC hype has passed, the social learning hype has passed. So what now? So now we are actually speaking about this relationship between human and non-human agents. That's, in my opinion, the burning question of digital learning here and now. So I wanted to explore this relationship, and I teamed up with some people from the University of Edinburgh, Hamish MacLeod, Christine Sinclair, and Jeremy Knox. Our 2 main affiliations, or 2 main schools or traditions that we kind of belong to, is Edinburgh University's Digital Education Group, which I'm a part of, and of course Lancaster's and Global Network Learning Community. I must emphasize that these 2 communities have long-lasting relationships from much before. Actually, I was first involved with the Digital Education Group, which introduced me to Vivian and to the Network Learning Group. So these 2 groups have long-lasting relationships. But the idea was like to explore this relationship between learning and algorithmic cultures, or to explore the relationships between learning and algorithms from the position of cultural studies. And we were thinking what to do, and we decided to edit a special issue. I know that it's not a very creative method, but it's cheap, and it was available, and we could do it quickly. So we actually issued a call for papers, and we asked people to reflect to some of these questions, like definitional issues, identification, algorithmic cultures and educational theory, politics of algorithms, and so on. In the next 2 slides, I will just show you the 5 papers that we received. I mean, this special issue has already been published. It's been online for a few months now. So I'll just briefly tell you what was in these papers, and then I'll briefly reflect to that, and then I'll open the floor for the discussion. So this is not going to be long. Ben Williamson from the University of Stirling asked an important question: who owns educational theory? What he was looking at, he looked at 2 important institutions which are involved in algorithm research. It's Stanford University's Lytics Lab and Pearson Center for Digital Data. And what he found out, and I cannot say that I was surprised, but when you see on the paper, it really looks scary. What he actually found out that the ownership of data, which is used in educational analytics, is more or less in private hands. It's in corporate hands. It's in the hands of corporate companies. And so educational data science has moved from universities or non-profit academic laboratories to the profit sector. In the last page, he just speaks a bit about possible consequences of this. I think that we all understand what possible consequences might be. But this is a fact. I mean, he really did this research, and I'm not sure how much, but a lot of educational data is actually not public anymore. It's private. Cormac O'Keefe, he's an Irishman working in Paris, was looking at an assessment. So basically, he was looking at the role of algorithms in assessment. And what he found out is that looking at large digital assessments, that they do not merely produce the data about somebody's ability to do or to know something, but actually that these tests necessarily create own criteria and own ways of assessing. Meaning that when we engage in algorithmic assessment, it actually not only produces the way how we do assessment, but it also heavily influences the very logic of assessment, which is, again, not so surprising, but it's also quite frightening actually to see that, you know, these people got into this with one idea, they employed algorithms, but what they actually got in return was not exactly what they designed or what they called for or what they planned. Actually, what went out is something else. And Cormac was trying to analyze all these things and to see what can be done about it. They're just 5 papers for it. Paul Prinsloo from South Africa, I can't remember which university, I think it's Cape Town, mapped some dimensions how higher education institutions collect, analyze, and use student data. And he actually showed that the way we collect and use data, of course, heavily influences the logic behind our institutions. And sometimes this logic can be quite obscure. So sometimes when things are left to algorithms, these things are then, of course, again, you get unexpected results. A lot of research speaks about unexpected results, and I'm gonna talk about it in a sec. But generally, he then, based on this, proposes a number of solutions for using algorithms, for trying to push algorithms towards an ethics of care rather than something else. Friend Tracy and Party Carmichael, they're from Wolverhampton or something like that, somewhere in England. They were disrupting the educational linked data and so on. So they were exploring the changing relationship between subject, content, and student. Basically, they had a large EU project, which was called Ensemble. I believe it was done in collaboration with somebody from Lancaster, I'm not sure, but when I was looking at the project, because I was interested in what they were doing, Lancaster was definitely one of the partners there. And now they also show that actually the algorithms provide quite unpredictable results, that you cannot really just expect them to work straightforward what you want them to do. And they identify some new pedagogical challenges and, of course, opportunities which arrive from that. These two are very optimistic. The others are not so much. So I think that this paper is worth mentioning because of that. And yeah, and they will present something similar at the Network Learning Conference as well. I reviewed their paper, it's really good. In general, Argenton, Mind the Gaps, he works at the university in Tokyo in Japan. And it's very interesting. He's a Frenchman working in Japan for many years. And his paper is interesting from many positions. One of the positions is that he was actually, his work is strongly imbued in the Japanese academic culture, which is a bit different than ours. So it's really interesting to look at his perspective. And he actually says that algorithm studies claims that algorithm studies are blind to ambiguity and slipperycy of context. The idea being that he identified like three main gaps, so between problems and solutions, between the binary with or without, and so on. And he proposes the solutions for bridging these binaries. I think that this second one is especially important, like gaps with or without algorithms, because it's not with or without. It's always with, but it depends on which way. So these are the five papers. These are the five papers that we received that we actually published, and I think they're really good because they, like, really show a very, very recent, practically now contemporary state of the art in algorithms cultures research. But what was interesting that I would like to share some issues that we had in editing. First, we received more than 20 submissions, and we published only 5 papers. And it's not because the papers were bad, but it was because many papers would still subscribe to one of or another determinist position, and we just wouldn't publish something like this, not because it's bad, but because we felt that it doesn't reflect the position of algorithmic cultures. So the question is, since so many people are actually trying to talk about it, but they're not actually trying to talk about it in that non-determinist way, the question is it a research tradition in the rise or maybe a fad? Well, I hope it's a research tradition in the rise, I would argue. And then we found out also that we received some great papers, but we just would never actually mention algorithms, or would mention algorithms in every second sentence, but without actually reflecting on them, just using the word algorithm for everything. I mean, you wouldn't believe actually, whenever there is some technology, so people would just replace the word technology with algorithm, and it would work. So the question is, how do we define the algorithm and actually the relationships between algorithm and learning? I mean, obviously the MOOCs, Facebook, all these things like from Web 2 or even earlier reside in some kind of algorithms. So why is it that now what is so different when we are speaking about algorithms today, and how we should approach these problems? And then what's also interesting is that approaches and perspectives in the special issue were various, like analytical, fictional, whatever, implying that maybe, again, maybe it's not really a research. It may point towards the lack of maturity of educational data science. But in my opinion, and it's just my view, is that I think that because this is the field which concerns everybody, it's not just educators, it's not just computer scientists, it's everybody who works these days actually is affected by algorithms. And because it's everybody's problem, everybody is entitled to answer this problem. And because people are using different worldviews and different disciplinary frameworks, actually, this is how we kind of arrive to post-disciplinarity. Now, I'm a big proponent of radical post-disciplinarity. I don't think that our academic disciplines, as they are set up today, are actually very good. But so I'm all up for reconciliatory rather than conflicting approach. Now, again, the question arises, okay, so when we're looking at this, okay, so which research traditions should we look into? And obviously, there's the method learning, and we can notice that many of these people in this special issue actually are actually all, I mean, people who've been involved in method learning before. But then, where else should we look for this? Where else should we look for answers or questions, more questions? And also, there's the question of complexity. I work in the School of Information Science. Actually, my PhD wasn't in information science, but it was kind of information science and technology and education. So, and even for me, algorithms are very complex. So the question is, okay, if algorithms are, how do we kind of simplify this and make it, I mean, because if it's questions, which are of everybody's concern, then it's not really fair that only a really, really small number of people who are able to understand how algorithms function actually have the right to say. Other people should have the right to say. And I think that our duty as educators is somehow to try and simplify all these things and synthesize it and actually try to make it more approachable to people. So as the last slide, I think, I came here with the claim that algorithmic cultures describe or explore the spirit of our times, the spirit of today, that the questions that we are dealing with in newspapers, the questions that we are reading about every day, the questions that we are facing in our everyday work are actually very, very, very closely related to algorithms. So if everybody should be included and no perspective should be privileged, are we talking about radical post-disciplinarity, or are we ready to accept this radical post-disciplinarity? And this is where I would actually like to stop my presentation and invite you to discuss some of these questions. I'm really interested in this discussion for many reasons. One of the reasons is because I'm editing this book on technological unemployment, so I'm really interested in your feedback because it kind of helped me to shape this up. But also because I'm definitely planning to do a lot of more work in this field in the future. So it's really good to hear from people from the School of Management, which is not my usual settings, that to hear your thoughts and opinions about it. Thanks a lot. So I would like to ask you to start the discussion.
Thank you, Peter. What a food for thought. Would anyone like to open up a discussion?
I guess you talk about definition. I suppose algorithms can be lots of different things to different people. So rather than go down that sort of taxonomy approach, I think it's quite exciting to think of the potential of artificial intelligence and think of that as an algorithm, if you like, although I don't think traditionally it's viewed as an algorithm, and where that may take us. And I think what's very exciting is the potential for individual education, because we come from social network learning, which is highly dependent on other people and how they learn and how they wish to interact. And I think the exciting potential for artificial intelligence is that it's almost a personal tutor. And is this something that people are exploring in terms of learning design technology?
Well, they are, yeah. We haven't had, in the special issue, we haven't had actually many of these, but now in the book I'm currently editing, there are many people speaking about this thing explicitly. So the use of robots and artificial intelligence in many areas, including education. Now, the question of definition, yes, robots work, artificial intelligence is basically a series of layers of algorithms laid one on another. So basically when we speak about algorithms, we definitely speak about artificial intelligence, and we definitely speak about these things. But what is interesting, and that's why we use algorithmic cultures, is, there are plenty of algorithms in this computer, but it doesn't create an algorithmic culture. The thing with the algorithmic culture is that there are many different algorithms which actually interact with each other and interact with people. And when they interact, then they actually can produce unexpected results. I'll just give you a banal example, just a really simple one. You have a Google account, for instance, which is a series of algorithms related to your email usage, to your calendar, to your this and to your that. And then you have another algorithm, which is Facebook, or series of algorithms. And then you have another series of algorithms, which is YouTube. And then you have another series of algorithms, which is Amazon.com. And then Google buys YouTube, so now these two algorithms join together. When they join together, your habits from these two algorithms actually start interacting with each other. So basically, what you have, it's not just you in communication with one algorithm. It's you in communication with one algorithm, it's you in communication with the other algorithm, and it's the two algorithms in communication with each other, which then produce. And that's actually the algorithm, the definition of algorithm is not, I don't think it's a new thing. I don't think that algorithm is a new thing. I mean, Gibson in Neuromancer speaks about algorithms. But this interaction between them is interesting.
So do you think education can then learn from the advertising industry? Because obviously with computer buying of advertising, which is these layers of algorithms that give you a total life history and a behavioural intention and previous behavioural action. Do you think there's a potential for education to learn from the commercial advertising industry the way that they are constructed and serve these customized, very highly individualistic advertising designs at the most appropriate time when you are wanting to receive them? So it's probably an interesting model to consider for education as a design concept.
Does that not have a question of what we think education is in a post?
I guess
learning.
I guess just to finish
Algorithmic
follow that.
culture.
Yeah, I just it's the principle of individualistic education is really the principle, the strand I'm trying to pursue
Yeah.
here.
Can I try and reframe that in terms of technological unemployment and just ask, obviously a large element of what a higher education institution does at the moment prepare people for employment. So how do we prepare a graduate for a world of unemployment or underemployment? What are the things that we should be, that's obviously an unfair question, but what are the things that we should be kind of instilling in our graduates to go out into a world where the jobs that they thought they might do might not be there, or might be being automated, or might be being kind of done away with, so to speak. So are there any qualities that we should be thinking about? It's kind of, I don't know, it's trying to reframe that question of personalisation. If technology is already personalising everything for everyone, how do we go beyond that, or take a step beyond that, to produce people who can kind of think with data but also beyond data?
Well, that's an excellent question, and actually I've got like 8 or 9 abstracts approaching this question from different perspectives from my next book. So it's far from being decided. I mean, it's a huge question, really. There are people like, I could probably log in and show you the abstracts I've got at the moment for the book, maybe a bit later. People are answering to this from various perspectives. For instance, a community which actually has started, and I received unsurprisingly many art chapter submissions or abstracts by now, by the human resources people and by the student services people from various universities, like speaking about what the precise question that they're asking is, what do we do as career counselors? What do we tell people when we know that they're preparing for a world where, I mean, their job is just not going to be there? And it's more or less, there are several possible answers there. In terms of if you look at political economy, then the most common answer now is, well, let's learn for the sake of learning, and let's introduce some sort of scheme. The universal basic income is the most common one, where they basically said, okay, you know, we are going to need a radically different distribution of wealth in the society. But then these career counselors who cannot wait until the universal basic income arrives, what they are actually trying to do, they are trying to direct people towards their, you know, intrinsic interests. They're trying to divorce learning from employment, which is, if you divorce learning from employment, it has really, really interesting consequences, because then universities are not anymore just places of preparation for work. They are places for learning for the sake of learning. You can call it even places for, buying social peace. Everybody's studying what they want and nobody's complaining that they don't have work. So this kind of thing. And what I find interesting, and in my own line of work, together with Michael Peters, I've published a couple of articles on this topic. We think that what we are looking at the moment is the development of radically different ways of thinking about work in general.
Mm-hmm.
Because even in Croatia, which is not a Protestant country, which is a Catholic country, but there is this not really Protestant work ethic, but there is this view that your job somehow determines your worth. Like that because you work, because it means that you are a good citizen, productive person. But in the world where, 60, 70, 80% of people simply structurally have no work because they have no access to work, the philosophical question then becomes, okay, how do we reimagine the notion of work itself?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the solutions is, of course, okay, let's divorce work from the feeling of self-worth, the feeling of self-importance, and these kind of things.
Mm-hmm.
So this is based on the abstract that I've got. Some people are talking about this divorce between work and some people are talking about universal basic income and basically it's complementary because one doesn't work with the other.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
Two things actually, since you started with the science fiction metaphor with Gibson. I think if you talk about a culture where your self-worth is no longer related to what you work or towards the contribution of work, you might want to look into the Ian Banks culture novels, because there it's particularly when talking about artificial intelligence and agents that are equal to humans. That's an interesting way of exploring that. Similar to how Gibson explored the cyber world. The other thing, though, I come from a background of management science, operations research, data analytics, so very much from an algorithmic point. And I'm interested in how analysts work with algorithms in decision support situations, where they complement the algorithms, where the algorithm is not yet able to do everything without the human, not making them unemployed, but where they have to work together to some extent. And I think it's very dangerous when we say that we should open up the discussion of how do algorithms work with us to people who do not understand what an algorithm is. Because I see that there is a very emotional debate about algorithms going on, about artificial intelligence going on, where from a technological point of view I would say either there is some fear that they can do something that they can't really do right now. Maybe they will be able to do it in the future, but then there have been big hopes for artificial intelligence in the future since 50 years or so. And on the other hand, so something between hope and fear that stems from not really understanding what algorithms is. So my argument would rather be try and educate people more about what is an algorithm. There's a sorting algorithm, or there is something like YouTube, which I would say is not just an algorithm, but it's a cyborg, because there is still people in YouTube and there is still people politics going on. It's more like a state, perhaps, than like a layer of algorithms, but a state that involves algorithms as equal agents. And so I think that I'm not sure whether simplification is the right way, but making people more aware of what an algorithm actually is and what a complex layer of algorithms is, and to what extent can we talk about artificial intelligence, and how does that lay with what we get from science fiction, what artificial intelligence might actually be.
There's an issue of trust there, I think.
Yes, yes.
Complete trust. Right at this present moment in time, I have very, very little trust in that.
Mm-hmm.
Because I know that a lot of it is wrong, right, and so if the decisions would have been made
Completely
up
based on
data,
data.
which is completely wrong. Where do we go from that point? So I sort of see it as, gosh, I don't know, thinking of the top of my head. I'm particularly interested in another type of language to approach the program, which is more kind of aesthetic based, kind of qualities based. So I'm trying to kind of like imagine the digital environment as just that, and it has its own set of qualities, like you know the air we breathe, and sort of how we begin to work with those qualities. Kind of you know kind of like the most obvious one and the most kind of prominent one is amplification. It's a very you know kind of like it's a prominent moment. So to take that as a starting point, kind of like an almost trying to not forget about data, but kind of adapt and sort of learn how to trust yourself within the qualities of this environment. And to go back on the relationship with work and having not work, I think creativity comes into that space. And if you can begin to work with the qualities within that world and very creative in that space, you almost begin to develop kind of like a pre-Renaissance mindset, you know, where specialisms are just beginning, kind of what, you know, 1400, 1500, kind of like, or the breakup of the individual task and specialisms.
But does that not raise another issue of control?
Yes.
I mean, who has control?
Yes. Who's actually making algorithms or developing algorithms? So you've got this sort of layered kind of issues. You know, like I struggle greatly with that subject, but I sort of fall back to creativity and qualities and being able to work with new environments. I think it's my kind of anchor in that space. If that makes sense.
That sounds a bit like, you know, the dialectic of enlightenment, which is a kind of cultural studies Bible and so what, not Bible as such, but that the more rational we become, the more kind of adherence we have to the rational, the more irrational that behaviour seems to be. So, which is kind of an after effect of the Enlightenment, or from the Enlightenment onwards. So I guess the question is, to what extent is algorithmic culture a natural kind of outcome of the Enlightenment, and the Enlightenment's kind of clinging to reason and to pre-programmed rational behaviour?
Well, that's a really interesting question. I just actually recently had a discussion with Jandrić, the guy who wrote this Methodolization of the Society, you might, because I'm doing one more project which is like interviewing people about learning and education, and I'm trying to interview people who did something big. So I just finished the interview with Jandrić, and he's in the context of McDonaldization. He speaks about rationality of irrationality, and it's actually Max Weber who was the first who started with this. At least that's what George told me. I'm not a sociologist, so I don't know, but I'll take his word for that. And we were speaking about algorithms, and what he said, and I would agree with his reply. First, algorithms are extremely rational because, as you say, people who know what algorithms are, they in fact know that they're just lines of code which actually execute what they're told to execute. But in this extreme rationality of the algorithm actually also lies extreme irrationality. It lies that there is, from the irrationality of response to irrationality that you never know what happens when several algorithms interact with each other. And actually that's the unpredictable and irrational things that actually happen. So reading the interviews, I mean, even if you have one algorithm, like speaking with people who program Google, yeah, we understand how our search engine works, but if you type this and this, we actually cannot predict what will come out. So
you talked a lot about that,
yeah.
and about unexpected results, and one that kind of interested me, because it is so influential within a university setting, is the assessment one. And you said there was unexpected results in Cormac O'Keefe's examinations back. In what sense were they unexpected?
Well, first is that what he found out, that actually when they had these tests and then they algorithmized the tests, and when they algorithmized the tests,
What do you mean they algorithmized?
well, meaning that tests that were previously done in some other ways have now been automated and done completely by algorithms, which were programmed to achieve certain goals. Finally, when after a few years of execution, it actually turned out that the resulting goals were very different from the ideas of people who programmed it. So that's the first thing. That's the place where the algorithm simply didn't fulfill. Well, it fulfilled something, but it hasn't really fulfilled the expectations of actually people who made it. And the second one, and that's related to your question about the linking algorithms in advertising industry, for instance, or learning between the advertising industry and education. The trouble is that with the advertising industry, if you get the wrong ad on your Facebook wall, it will not hurt you much. If you get, but the trouble is what happens when this unexpected behavior, and there is a margin of mistake there, when it actually starts affecting people's life very much. I mean, from student debt, from the fact that people pay a huge amount of money to actually study, from the idea that some kinds of assessment can actually put somebody's life on this part or path or on that path. These are very decisive moments in somebody's life. So should it actually be, it's not just education. The question is like the insurance industry. Should the algorithm determine your eligibility for a loan, or should whatever? So this is the kind of, algorithms are doing quite a good job there. But then they are introducing, the first thing they're introducing is they're actually changing the ethos of what's going on. And the second thing is that because of the complexity, they're just not completely reliable. And now there's the question, should we really use them, or should we use them and, I don't know, check them, or what should we do?
But again, coming from the perspective of someone who does algorithms, I encounter that kind of question with regard to autonomous driving.
Yeah.
And so there's the question, what if an autonomous car drives over a child? You know how many human drivers get drunk and drive over a child, but we somehow think it's worse when an algorithm does. I know so many, I'm going to talk about the difference in teaching at the university in Germany and here in England where I observed it. You have external examiners and examination boards and moderation between courses. In Germany, you have one professor who makes the decision for the grade and no one asks. No one. I can make the decision by myself, I can fail this student or I can give them A, and no one will ask. So I personally am the one who gets to determine their future life course, because I think that's what educators do. And no one asks, and an algorithm perhaps would not consider whether they were rolling their eyes in their lecture, and I got annoyed with them over the course. Of course, I never would do that, but maybe someone would, right? And so I have to say that there is this, yes, of course, algorithms can be irrational in that they stupidly do input to output, and no matter how senseless the input, they will still try to apply their rules. But I see a huge chance for a more rational, more equal or fair approach to handling education, for example, if it's perhaps not completely handled by algorithms, but checked by algorithms, by using the opportunity of having some checks and balances there via algorithmic culture, perhaps.
Okay, what happened in the service sector, for instance, with the introduction of automated? Have you tried to install your internet, BT or something?
Yeah, I
Did you
just say
talk to
nonsense
the, did you
until they
talk to
let
the
me talk to a
machine?
human.
Okay. So yeah, theoretically
Yeah.
it's good. practically wherever they put it in the service center, it ended up terrible.
Yeah, that's
Now-
the human way of doing that. Right?
Now the question is, it could probably work, yeah. It could probably improve things, but it shouldn't definitely improve things in the way that
It doesn't automatically.
BT customer service, when your internet dies and you need to call somebody, and after 2 hours of talking to the machine, you finally get on the phone somebody from Pakistan who is fixing your wire in your wall, which is in Edinburgh, my case was. So yeah, so that's something that's to be. I mean,
But that's humans misusing a tool in implementing it. I mean, that's not the algorithm's fault. It's, yeah.
Well, that raises
Yeah.
a very good
It's a tool. It's like a weapon or like.
Yeah, but that's the crux of the problem in a sense, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, it's two problems. There's the practicality of algorithms, and then there's the actual human understanding and criticality of being able to know and awareness. And from a university perspective, I think we've been more into encouraging understanding and criticality of knowing what these things are doing. But that doesn't change what you were saying, is that they're mainly owned by corporate organisations.
well, data is owned by corporate organizations as well. I mean,
Yeah.
This is what's quite scary as well. And well, I mean, the whole point in the approach that we are trying to make is not to talk about algorithms per se, but to talk about algorithmic cultures.
Yeah.
So, and algorithmic cultures, yeah, would imply these relationships between human and non-human actors, and they would actually imply, yeah, you're right. I'm sure that we could probably develop a system, an algorithmic system that would be more efficient and fairer and probably more honest to students than some of the procedures that we have in place.
That would also be a culture, would be a better algorithmic culture.
But if you leave it here, and if you just say, okay, let's develop an algorithmic whatever at Lancaster, is it going to end up like that? Maybe. But in order to end up like that, we should study these things, and we should actually
there's no
look.
predictable
Yeah, and we should actually look at those things. And that was the idea. That's the underlying actually idea that we are trying to work with. We are trying to explore these things, not to be negative towards algorithm, because it's stupid to be negative towards something that's not alive and made by people. I mean, I don't think there's a place for positive or negative emotions towards them. The question is how they actually interact with us and what do we get of it, and in an individual sense, but also in a university settings, but then wider as well. You know, there are many questions there. You know, like, and they are deeply cultural. And I'll just say one more thing, and then I'll shut up. There's in Japan, they have a radically different attitude towards artificial intelligence than we do in Europe. So, for instance, they started in these homes for elderly people. They started with robots, and it actually works quite well. Europe and America are generally hesitant towards the idea to buy a robot and to leave the robot to take care of your grandma. But in Japan, they seem to be fine with it. So now it's actually in Manchester, there is a great exhibition called The Robots in the Museum of Science and Technology. And you can see that robot which caters to all people in Japan, and you can try to talk to this robot, and you can see actually what it can and what it cannot do. I would personally not spend my day talking to this robot.
You've been talking to that robot.
I've
You
been
told
for
me.
20 minutes, for 20 minutes, and I've tried, and after 20 minutes I got bored because it got
Really?
repetitive, yeah. but, you know, and it's not so good with the accents as well. So, yeah.
Is it helpful in thinking about just listening to people talking, and I must be obsessed with classifying things, but is it helpful at all to think about algorithmic cultures and consideration of them by categorizing, having two main categories, where you have this pre-programmed predictive algorithm where we know it's the human dimension and the interaction from the human angle that is really what should be studied rather than the algorithm. Whereas if you looked at more complex algorithms where the behaviour could be emergent, sort of agent simulation type of algorithms, where it's unpredictable how these, similar to your context where you have 2 or 3 algorithms interacting, so the outcome's totally uncertain and unknown. Would that be helpful to split the population of algorithmic cultures into these 2 contexts to study very different behaviours that may be manifest? I don't know, I'm just posing the question, listening to this discussion.
Well, for me, the first category that you're talking about, yeah, those are very primitive algorithms, but I wouldn't even include them into the notion of algorithmic culture. The whole idea is that, I mean, my fridge is online. All algorithms are connected these days. Even those very predictive ones mixed with the unpredictable ones produce unpredictable, or mixed with other predictive ones produce unpredictable results. You cannot really isolate. Yeah, you can isolate the algorithm which works in your dishwasher. It's probably not online yet, so you can know that it has 11 programs and it does these 11 programs. But it's not very interesting to study, for me at least. When it becomes interesting is this complexity when they actually try to, because the relationship between human and non-human actors is not so interesting in the case of dishwasher. I mean, you press the button and it washes your dishes. It becomes interesting later on,
Okay.
for me at least.
I'll get rid of my classification.
Well,
That's relief. Is there other angles that people would like to pick up with Petar?
I was just wondering that you say algorithmic cultures, so does that imply that there are different kinds of algorithmic culture for different people, or I mean, I was just interested how what do you mean by culture here?
Yeah.
Is it a way of arranging different technologies together, or?
I would say that it denotes a cultural studies approach to the studies of algorithms. Meaning that algorithms are a part of the way we live, and that they are cultural agents. And because they are cultural agents, because they are cultural agents in a way which is in ways which are often strange and unpredictable and so on. We could of course examine them from many perspectives. So for instance, I work in the School of Engineering, and the majority of my students are computer programmers. They examine algorithms in very different ways. They break them apart, they know how these algorithms are doing, and they produce new algorithms. That's one way of looking at it, an engineering way. Then there's a way of looking at it, there's a utilitarian way of looking at it, like most advertisers work like that. So okay, let's do this does this, and I don't know how many percent of cases it produces that, and so on. It produces ethical concerns in its own right. But then there's this cultural influence, and in education I think we should be mostly interested in this cultural influence. So it's not just about technological unemployment, or it's not just about this, it's not just about that, but it's about the totality of all that. And I said algorithmic, I mean, we kind of work with the plural, with the algorithmic cultures, because we would like to acknowledge that there are many approaches within this approach as well, and that we would like to leave it open to any kind of, intervention or different critical angle or so on. There are ethical questions, I mean, I have many anecdotes from the world of algorithms. How, what are these, unexpected consequences? I mean, you could use them, but that's the idea. So the notion of algorithmic cultures implies a wide range of cultural studies approaches to the algorithm.
Do you think there's something in, do you know the Imagined Communities book? I think I can't remember who wrote it. Is it somebody Anderson? But basically, he talks about how nation states are formed and how essentially our ideal or fantasy of a nation state is determined by the technology and the printing press and things like that,
Yeah.
that it employs. So this creates a fantasy of England or a fantasy of Croatia. So to what extent do you think algorithms actually determine the notion of culture itself, like that their cultures are algorithmically fashioned as a certain fantasy of the technologies that are deployed within that culture?
Well, again, it depends on how you look at culture. If we look at culture as nation culture, then it's one thing. But we can also speak about the culture of openness, for instance. And what the algorithms did do, actually, to us, we all just click, I agree, I agree, I agree, and we all give out our data. If somebody approached you in the street and asked you so much data about yourself, you would probably not feel very comfortable. Or if you go out on a date and your date says, oh, no, okay.
But that's already done in advance.
And we give it out without thinking, right? So this is the culture. This is a created culture of sharing our personal data without thinking.
It's just when setting off on your phone. Every app, it says access to contacts, access to control
Everything.
your phone, everything. You can't set
Everything.
anything up without giving them access.
If you say no, you don't get the app.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
your
There's
mail,
an
your
exchange
phone.
there, isn't there?
Yeah.
There's an exchange at that point, so people receive something for my data, such
Yeah.
at what level, such in the street. You know, if somebody had a £10 note and they give you a £10 note in return for your name, you think, well, that isn't going to hurt, is it? And that guy will take the £10 note and leave. So it's an interesting conversation.
It is an exchange, but
Transaction.
speaking about algorithmic capitalism, the theorists like, I don't know, Christian Fuchs and some of these
Yeah.
others actually have clearly shown that this exchange is very unequal. As an individual,
Yeah.
as individuals, we don't have. Essentially, it is exchange. But slave society was always some kind of exchange. Slaves would get food and water, and they would work for food and water. It was exchange. It was not fair, but it was an exchange. So this is what I'm. It's not that, and this is another question. So actually, maybe to kind of join these two issues together. Depending on the type of culture, I don't think personally that national cultures will be of growing importance probably in the future. But that's just me. There's just nothing. There just has nothing to do with the algorithm. But the culture of exhibition, for instance, there's a great new book which was just published maybe a few weeks ago, but by Gert Loving at the university, the Institute of Network Cultures in Amsterdam, and the book is called The Culture of the Selfie, where actually the author explains the notion of selfie from self-portraits in oil on canvas in the 14th century to the culture of the selfie today, where you basically come over and you get nice dinner. Okay, so let's now start eating, and this kind of thing. So there are many different cultures, and I think that algorithms are definitely creating new cultures, making some older cultures more or less important. They're simply introducing new power dynamics within the cultures. And as you said, our relationship with the algorithm is mediated through big corporations, which make this type of exchange very, very unequal. And that's the problem. And that's also the problem with using algorithms in, admissions process in the university. For as long as a student has a live person to complain to, I would imagine that algorithms would be a good thing. But if you don't have a live person to complain to, and you have a completely unequal power relationship where actually a human being is being determined, you just get assessment by the algorithm and that's it.
It's like Google, isn't it?
That's
Right, you kind of speak it. Well, you could if you really tried very, very hard and went down and knocked on the door. But kind of like if I want to kind of change password or kind of some complexity around this issue I've got, like I have to step through the machine and work it out myself.
Or let's talk about, yesterday there was a nice, or the day before, there was this seminar that you actually emailed me about, but I didn't know, but I saw. So
academic writing.
okay, so speaking about ref, for instance, right? So what determines the ref? It determines where your article is published, how many quotations, and what's the impact factor. All these things are actually decided by algorithms. Not all, okay, inclusion in databases is not. It's still a human decision. But the impact factor is completely automated thing, which kind of goes out of something. So even now, human destinies are actually being heavily shaped and heavily determined by algorithms. In terms of, I guess, all of you, and me included. So this is...
Going back to that question of academic practice, and you mentioned that your special edition attracted a lot of interest, but also a lot of different forms of response. And I wondered if there's a scope to suggest that you need to perhaps write differently about algorithmic culture, and perhaps even the practice of being an academic, the practice of publishing in book form, in linear narrative book form, on private publishing websites and companies such as Pearson and things like that, that actually there's a question there for academic practice that if you want to respond to algorithmic culture, probably in terms of a resistance to it, then you should question your own academic practice and how you write and where you write.
I'm aware of the time, but that just gets into a whole other debate of managerialism, doesn't it? Regulation.
Well, it doesn't,
we don't
because
want to get into that debate because I am aware of the time, and I don't know whether the room is good, and we need to think about coming to an end. Was there, well, no, we haven't really got time for any last questions, so I'm sure you will respond to anything that people were to get in touch with you. We have video, we will have the slides, so eventually that will be open and available for people. I think at this point it would be just nice to thank you for a very interesting and a bit
thank you very
scary
much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
discussion.